Of course, today is November 17th, 2016. On this day in history, November 17th, 1800, Congress holds its first session in the partially completed new Capitol building in what was then known as Washington City. 1856, the United States establishes Fort Buchanan, and in 1973, President Nixon insists he is not a crook. In the midst of the Watergate scandal that eventually ended his presidency, President Richard Nixon tells a group of newspaper editors gathered at Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida, that, quote, "I'm not a crook." As we mentioned, Watergate would eventually take its toll on the Nixon presidency, and on August 9th, 1974, Richard Nixon resigned from office. Gerald Ford was sworn in as our 38th president and eventually issued an unconditional pardon to his predecessor. The Ford presidency and the Nixon pardon, the subjects of this American moment.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
It was a stirring moment. Never before had a president resigned and another man risen to the nation's highest office. On August 9th, 1974, Gerald R. Ford was sworn in as the country's 38th president. It was a time when the nation rocked by scandal. The same day, August 9th, 1974, the House Judiciary Committee passed articles of impeachment against then-President Richard M. Nixon. That same day, Richard Nixon resigned, and Vice President Ford was hastily sworn in as Commander-in-Chief by Chief Justice Warren Burger. Soon after taking office, Gerald Ford ended the Watergate prosecution by granting Richard Nixon a full and unconditional pardon to the fallen president with this decree.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over.
On October 17th, 1974, President Ford agreed to appear before Congress to defend his historic decision.
I was absolutely convinced then, as I am now, that if we had had this series, an indictment, a trial, a conviction, and anything else that transpired after that, that the attention of the President, the Congress, and the American people would have been diverted from the problems that we have to solve.
Historians have lauded President Ford's political courage in granting the pardon, but the move was widely believed to have cost him the presidency in 1976, when he was defeated by former Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter. For Newsmax TV, I'm Bill Curtis, and this is an American moment.
From history back to the here and now, protests over Donald Trump's election as our next president continue, and it's been very curious on some university campuses. Protesters there standing up saying that there should be support for illegal immigrants, whether they are students or workers or just people who come into the country. Let's talk about that with our next guest. From Newsmax Washington, Cabot Phillips, the Director of Campus Outreach at the Leadership Institute and a contributor to campusreform.org. Cabot, it is great to have you with us today. And we know about sanctuary cities such as San Francisco, but what about sanctuary campuses? Are these people on campus absolutely serious? It's not just riot rhetoric, if you will?
I've been on a lot of campuses in the past month, and specifically this week, and there's not a lot of logic from these students who are protesting for these sanctuary campuses. Essentially, what they want is for universities to deny ICE access to their campuses. They want to make sure that ICE has no room to operate or to detain illegal immigrant students, or undocumented students as they would call them. Also, many of these students are calling for universities to budget out money so that these students can have their legal fees paid for if they're undocumented students and run into legal problems. So essentially what these students are doing is calling on their universities to pick and choose which laws to follow and which laws not to follow. And it's a scary precedent to set if these universities capitulate to these demands, because it's completely disregarding rule of law, and it's a very scary notion for these universities to follow.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, we were seeing scenes from yesterday's demonstration at Yale. So I guess it's proof that Yaleys may not be the sharpest knives in the drawer. I mean, this whole notion of dogma overtaking reason, intellect, and law is astounding. I tell you what, we'll talk some more, but since this is America Talks Live, someone is waiting patiently on the phone at 1-877-NEWSMAX. That's 1-877-639-7629 from New York. Angelo. Hiya, Angelo.
Yes, hello?
Hello, you're on the air. Welcome.
Yes, well, thanks for having me.
You bet.
And I just want to point out an idea that, you know, the college kids, the millennials, people have forgotten what a great country and the freedoms we enjoy here. If they were overseas with no fresh water, no place to sleep, no roof over their head, they wouldn't be out making the noise they're making. They should respect their country. They should respect the votes of the American people. A decision was made. It was legal. The electoral vote was grand. It wasn't small. It wasn't by one state. So I really don't know what they're looking for.
Well, let's ask Cabot, because Cabot is a millennial who refuses to drink the campus Kool-Aid. It's got to be jarring for you generationally. I mean, I'm an old guy now, you know, class of 1980 at NC State. And even back then, I had some great professors, but they were lefties, and we used to go round and round and argue. But now on campus, there's no diversity of thought. People are browbeaten into being a lefty, being an open borders advocate or else. What is the atmosphere now, Cabot, and how do you, as a fellow millennial, talk to these guys who are absolutely caught up in this leftist dogma?
We've been seeing over and over again at the Leadership Institute's campus reform that college administrations, professors are overwhelmingly liberal, and they want to stifle any sort of ideas or any thought that goes against their agenda. And so I was on campus at Towson University 2 days ago. There was a walkout during class that was actually led by professors and administrators leading a anti-Trump walkout. And I expected the professors to get up and try and actually give some logical points as to why they should be protesting or whatever it was. One of the professors got up, and I watched as she said that we need to learn how to talk about racism so that when students go home and have to talk to their Republican family members on Thanksgiving, they'll know how to address racism. As if somehow, if you're a Republican, you must be a racist, or if you disagree with their ideas on immigration or the presidential campaign, you must be racist. And this is something, it's not limited to just the Ivy Leagues, it's not limited to schools in the D.C. area. All across the country, we're seeing professors that are stifling the opinions of conservative students in order to further their liberal agenda.
And you know, the irony here, I'm looking at scenes from Berkeley. And the University of Berkeley, in 1963, there was a free speech movement, but now the left wants to stifle speech that is counter to their dogma. 40 seconds left. Speaking of the West Coast, what went on with the riots in Portland? A TV station out there checked. 70% of the people arrested didn't bother to vote. What does that tell you about this crowd? 30 seconds, Cabot.
It tells you that these students and these young people and protesters are really misplacing their fear. If they spent half as much energy actually out campaigning and knocking doors for their candidate, maybe they wouldn't be protesting because their candidate, who was most likely Hillary Clinton, would have actually won the race. And what we're seeing here, it's complete hypocrisy. 2 months ago, when Donald Trump said he might not accept the results of the election, they said how un-American it was. But 2 months later, when their candidate loses, they're refusing to accept the results of the election, and it shows how hypocritical they are and how misplaced their rage is.
Well, it is a favorite tactic of the left that you folks at the Leadership Institute inform everybody about. The left projects the worst aspects of their behavior and their tactics onto conservatives. Blame us for what they end up doing, and this is a perfect example in terms of the unrest in the wake of Mr. Trump's election. Cabot, we thank you for your time from Newsmax Washington. Look forward to having you back soon. Cabot Phillips there. Now, tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern on Newsmax Prime, our political panel, Brad Blakeman and Margaret Howe, our radio roundtable with Howie Carr and Curtis Sliwa, and a European diplomat who's not too diplomatic toward Europeans. He's asking them to cool it toward Mr. Trump. That would be Andres Simoniak. We'll be looking for you at 8 Eastern. Till then, thanks for watching.